The children of Gatlin, Nebraska, led by a child preacher, drag a pig into their midst. As a haunting melody rises from the crowd, they proceed to kill the pig in a ritualistic manner. The child preacher, claiming divine inspiration, explains to the other children that this act is a necessary response to the actions of adults and asserts that their God, he who walks behind the rows, has spoken to him in his dreams. 12 years later, Bert and Vicky, a couple in a strained marriage, are on a road trip through Nebraska. Amidst their heated argument, they are on the lookout for a place to eat. Suddenly, a boy with a slit throat, his face smeared with blood, emerges from the fields and runs onto the road. Not noticing him and unable to swerve in time, Bert hits the boy, causing his body to be crushed under the vehicle. Shocked by what just happened, Vicky heads out of the car to see the boy's body. Bert takes a moment to process what just happened before stepping out of the car as well. He opens the trunk and pulls out a blanket, taking it to cover the boy's corpse. Vicky continues to berate Bert, telling him that he's a brute and mocks him for his history in the army. This leads Bert to retaliate by slapping her. While examining the boy's corpse, Bert notices that his throat had already been slit by an unknown assailant. The realization dawns on him that the perpetrator is still at large. Bert hurriedly places the body in the trunk of the car. He then instructs Vicky to wait for him in the car with the engine running while he searches the cornfield for the killer. Just wanting to leave, Vicky finds herself wondering how she ended up in a marriage with a guy like Bert. Following a blood trail on the ground and on the corn leaves, Bert manages to find a suitcase. Unbeknownst to him, a young man with a bloodied face and a knife emerges behind him out of nowhere, only to retreat when the car's horn sounds in the distance. Bert catches a glimpse of the man disappearing into the cornfield, forcing him to run back to the car. Upon Bert's return, they place the found suitcase in their car's back seat and drive off. As they leave, the young man with the knife and a child wearing a round-crowned hat emerge from the cornfields, meeting in the middle of the road. Bert, relying on his military training, confides in Vicky that he felt someone was watching them. Vicky makes progress, untying the knots of the suitcase. Meanwhile, Bert realizes the eerie emptiness of the town, steps out in search of a payphone, only to realize that all electricity and phone lines have been cut. Unbeknownst to him, a young girl is secretly observing his actions. As Bert and Vicky continue their unfortunate journey, they stop at various establishments, including stores and diners, only to find them deserted. Hidden from their view are the decaying, rotting, skeletal remains of the town's former inhabitants. The only signs of life are the religious roadsides they encounter along their drive, and the lone radio station that's operational, broadcasting prejudiced religious rhetoric. Upon opening the suitcase, they discover several items that belong to the deceased child. Most noticeably, they find a disturbing corn idol, which Bert insists on keeping for the police, despite Vicky's protests. Simultaneously, the children of Gatlin gather, their attention focused on a similar corn idol. These idols seem to symbolize their devotion to he who walks behind the rows. Then, the child preacher named Isaac proclaims the need for sacrifice, reminiscent of that of the blue man. Stirred by his words, the children resolve to eliminate the outsiders, initiating a terrifying chase. In the desolate town, the children lurk in the shadows, keeping a watchful eye on the couple's car. Bert and Vicky find themselves at a church. Vicky, traumatized by her past experiences with her preacher father, refuses to enter. Bert, frustrated, decides to venture inside alone, leaving Vicky in the car with a promise to return within 10 minutes. Inside the church, Bert stumbles upon a chilling sight. The walls are adorned with various occult drawings and biblical passages, creating an eerie atmosphere. A larger version of the idol that was in the boy's suitcase catches his eye, its presence dominating the room. He then stumbles upon a book listing the birthdays of the town's inhabitants, including their dates of death and the names of their offspring, conveying the grim reality of the town. Meanwhile, Vicky, unnerved by the eerie silence and the feeling of being watched, steps out of the car and yells out that she knows someone is tracking her. It is then that Isaac, perched atop a building, signals the hidden children to reveal themselves. As they close in on Vicky, they cryptically tell her that they are her destiny. Among them is Malachi, the older child who had previously slit the boy's throat, who assures her that he is there to bring her peace. Panicked, Vicky retreats to the car just as the children, under Isaac's command, begin to vandalize. In a desperate attempt to defend herself, Vicky pulls out a shotgun and fires it at Malachi, but he evades the bullet, which instead hits another child. Despite her efforts, the sheer number of children leaves her powerless. As Malachi approaches her, he instructs her to pray before ending her life with his knife. In the midst of a disturbance outside, Bert exits the church, only to discover Malachi has blown up the car. When questioned about his actions, Malachi chillingly gestures that he has slit Vicky's throat. Bert, in disbelief, confronts him about their twisted behavior, which prompts Isaac to skillfully hurl a knife into his arm. Bert retaliates, declaring they need more than just knives to intimidate him. This confrontation escalates into a physical altercation with the children, during which Bert manages to break one child's arm and use another's knife against him to kill him. Attempting to escape, Bert is pursued by the boys, acting under Isaac's orders once again. Bert flees into the cornfield, a place the children dare not enter at first. Isaac, in the meantime, accuses Malachi of causing the other children's death, claiming that his faith is weakened and that the outsiders are a test from he who walks behind the rows, requiring them to sacrifice Bert as well. Assured of his renewed faith, Malachi bravely enters the cornfields, initiating a tense chase with the other children. During this pursuit, a young child encounters Malachi and shares his vision of their God, leading Malachi to suggest that the child could be the next prophet after Isaac. Bert, now exhausted and bleeding profusely, begins to experience flashbacks of his time in the war. Amidst the chaos and killing of a few children, he finds himself cradling the dying child who claimed to be the next prophet in his arms. After the unsuccessful attempt to capture Bert, the boys return to their dwellings, greeted by the joyous faces of their female peers. The time for dinner has arrived. A prayer is said, and they begin to eat their meals that are mostly based around corn. Meanwhile, Bert keeps himself energized by picking a few ears of corn and eating them himself. Later inside the church, a ritual of conceiving a new child commences, with two of the older members of the group taking their clothes off and making love, while being cheered on by the observing children. Following this, the children make another attempt to capture Bert, the older ones leading the charge once again. Bert, remembering his military training, uses the constellations as his guide to find the correct direction. Mysteriously, while navigating the cornfield, he finds himself ensnared by the corn, which appears to come alive, opening and closing of its own accord, as if consciously trapping Bert. Bert eventually escapes the cornfield, only to find Vicky's body in a horrifying state, crucified on a strange cross with her eyes ripped out and their sockets being impaled. He finds her next to the rotten corpse of the blue man, who appears to have met the same fate. As the children close in on Bert, he experiences a hallucination of Vicky awakening, her voice echoing eerily, mocking him for his impending demise. The next day, a cremation ceremony headed by Isaac takes place for all the children that have perished. As the ceremony ends and the bodies of the fallen children are set on fire, it is revealed that Bert, too, has met his end, crucified next to Vicky and the blue man. In the final moments, in the dead of night, the children arrive with torches at the cornfield to enact another ritual. Despite her protests, Malachi instructs his pregnant wife to raise their child, to love their religion, and hate the world, before he and the other children who have reached adulthood venture into the cornfield, sacrificing themselves to he who walks behind the rows.